Hello, everybody. I wanted to wait until everybody had had a chance to weigh in on this question before I weighed in on this question. So your classmate asked a really insightful question, and I the question was originally asked in through inbox in a private forum, and to me, I felt like it required more than just my perspective for multiple reasons. One, there's a lot of different ways to look at this question, and two, I'm coming at this question from a point of privilege, right? So I am a middle class white lady. I have some hidden disabilities. I have some hidden disadvantages, but they are hidden, right? And so when I interact with systems, what those systems see is basically a person of privilege. And so my perspective on this is going to be different than people of color, right? And people who come from more disadvantaged backgrounds. So, right. So I didn't feel that I was the appropriate person to give the be all end all answer to this. So that I think that there is a little bit of learning there for everybody before I even talk about the my perspective on this is that as social workers, we have to have some understanding of our own perspective and place where we're coming from, so that we don't overstep, right? Is that we don't present our perspective as the perspective. Okay, so with that being said, here's my perspective. We have an obligation as social workers to do two things. We have to advocate on an individual level or a family level for the clients that we're working with. And we also have an obligation to work within the system, okay? And to try and change the system to be more equitable. And I would say that sometimes those two things don't work together that well. And we, as folks who understand that many disadvantaged people are at risk from interactions with systems like the police or EMS even, or the courts or whatever, we have an obligation to try to change those systems. And how do we change those systems? So there's lots of different ways to do that. You can do policy work. That's why we talked during the research methods module so much about doing policy work and doing work around research, because research changes practice, right? So research should underlie changes in policy at the agency level, right? And those changes in policy should change the behavior of the people who work in those agencies. Okay, so I think that we have to work at that level, but we also, when we're interacting with our clients with those systems, we have to be advocates. Okay, it's not that we don't call them for help. It's that we take, we size up the situation. We do a risk assessment. We talk to the client that we're with about what the situation is. And there are some situations where it's very clear and you don't have a choice. You have to call the police, right? So, for example, if you are somebody, or if you are working with somebody who is a risk to themselves or others, you don't have a choice. You have to call the police. And how you do that exactly is there's lots of moving parts there, right? So, for example, if that person is acting in a threatening manner, it would be great if you can get them calmed down first, because that interaction with the police is not going to be a good one if they're out of control. But that you always have to, in the end, prioritize your own safety. So if they're acting in a threatening manner towards you or towards people who are truly at risk, you need to make a decision that protects you and protects the people around you. But there are some situations where it's not really a choice. If you're a mandated reporter, which you will be, and you observe neglect or abuse, or become aware of the possibility of neglect or abuse, you don't have a choice. You have to do it. You have to. You have to interact with those systems. So, just be aware that there are some situations in which, regardless of whether you think it's a good idea or not, you are obligated to interact with those systems. But when you do, you have a responsibility to be on the side of your client. I remember one time I had to call the police to assist me with one of my child welfare clients. He was 12, I think, but he was big 12. And the police showed up, and they wanted to do all sorts of things that were not necessary. They wanted to search his room. There was no way that I was going to allow that. And so part of being a social worker is standing between your client and unnecessary system involvement, right? And so the police needed to be there in that moment, but they didn't need to be going through his stuff. That was not what they needed to be there for. And so in the discussion that you had, several of you talked about situations where the police needed to be there but overstepped their bounds completely. And that is a big part of being a social worker, is not letting those systems do more than you need them to do, right? So that you have to understand also that some situations in which you think the police are necessary, or you think that systems are necessary, there might be an alternative. And so it's your job to be kind of aware of what those alternatives are. Okay? So for example, in many counties, there are crisis teams that you can call instead of the police. And if you are working in that county, you have an obligation to understand the systems around you, okay? And so that you can access the least restrictive system. All right. So that's another thing. You don't have to. No, I'm going to go a different direction with that. It's our job to model for the systems that we involve good client interaction. Will they, take it to heart? Maybe not. But you remember that you are always on the side of your client. Always. Even if they're threatening you, you're always on the side of your client. And so you are demonstrating to your client that, okay, we had to call the police because I told you, if we ended up in a situation where somebody feels unsafe, we're going to have to talk to the police about that. But once they're there, it's your job to partner with your client and work with the police, and to show the police that you are calm, that you are not afraid, even if you're terrified, that you are not afraid. Okay? And to kind of set the tone. It's your job to set the tone. And for those of you who are walking around with a little bit of baggage about your own interactions with systems, that's going to be hard to do. It is, not gonna lie. But if we don't model good interactions with systems, people are not going to learn how to have better interactions with them. And I mean that on both sides. I mean that, from the police themselves, or whatever system you're interacting with, and also from the client side, right? So, like, the reality of the situation is that sometimes it's not a good idea to involve those systems, but you don't have a choice. So the best that we can do is we can advocate, and we can demonstrate, okay, what it's supposed to look like. And you got to fight sometimes. You got to push back sometimes. If the police want to do something and it's not a good idea, or it's not fair, or it's aggressive, or whatever, you have to have the strength of your convictions to say, we're not doing that. No, we're not doing that. And they force it. There's nothing you can do about that. But you got to show your client that you're not just going to let the system roll over them, because not only does it protect them in that moment, but it shows them that your job is to protect them. And that's important, right? Okay. Hope this helps.